everybody. Welcome. Um, I'll give a couple seconds for everyone to filter in and get settled. But it is lovely to see you all this evening. And thank you for joining us at the end of a long day. My name is Dr. Rachel Merson, and I'll be our webinar moderator tonight. I'm a clinical psychologist and one of the members of the board of directors for the Selective Mutism Association. And I am very pleased here to introduce a fellow board member, Dr. Brittany Bice-Urbach, who will be presenting to you today on From Final Bell to First Day, Practical Home and School Strategies for Supporting a Strong Finish in Spring and a Smooth Start in Fall for Children with Selective Mutism. So I'll turn this over in just a second. But before we get started, I think I had one announcement for everyone. And I wanted to make sure you all are aware of the Selective Mutism Association's annual conference that is scheduled for the last weekend of September. Now, of course, the dates are escaping me, but I want to say it's September 26th and 27th or 25th and 26th. So Friday and Saturday, and it will be an in-person conference in Boston, Massachusetts. So we invite you all to save the date. You can find out more information about the details of the conference on our website. We have two tracks of talks at the conference, one that is geared more towards professionals, the other that is geared more towards caregivers and parents of individuals with selective mutism. So there's a lot of great content that will be there, and we hope that you're able to join us in person. But with that, I am going to turn things over and let Dr. Bice-Urbach get started with our presentation today. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. And I'll be moderating the chat throughout, so I may respond to you right away. But if it's kind of a bigger question, we may save those to the end. So with no further ado, here we go.
Well, thank you so much, Rachel, and so excited to be here this evening with everyone else as well. Just one more thing to mention before we get started. This webinar is made possible by a generous grant from the Gordon and Marilyn Macklin Foundation. So thank you to the foundation for their support of the Selective Mutism Association. So today we are going to be thinking a bit about how we can help kiddos with selective mutism finish the end of the school year with a strong end, while also helping to start plan for the transitioning into a new year. So before we do that, I do want to give a few disclaimers about we are going to be talking about a number of different strategies and things to be considering as we are thinking about that end of year and transition into the new year. But I also want to just recognize that for each of our kiddos with selective mutism, we know that their own unique needs and their growth in communication will be specific to each individual. And so as you are thinking maybe about your own kiddos, please think about how these strategies may apply based on their current level of functioning and their current communication goals within the school environment. So we can adjust steps appropriately based on each child's needs, and all steps forward are positive steps. So we always are celebrating the successes as we go. So as we talk today, there are going to be 5 key areas that we are going to be focusing on. We're going to start with just some creative ideas about end of year exposures so that we have an opportunity to think about how we can end that year strong with some exposure practice in the school environment. These might be things that you could consider talking with school teams about or collaborating with staff around in order to help make sure that we are maximizing growth in the springtime. We'll next talk about celebrating successes, starting the transition into thinking about the next school year. We'll think about how we can maybe do some school exposure practice during the summertime. And finally, we'll think about fading into the new school year, or how we really start that new school year off strongly as well. For those that register today, you will receive these slides in a PDF format. And in addition to that, a second set of handouts that have some of the specific handouts or materials that I talk about here in our presentation. So know that those will be coming following the presentation today. One of the pieces that's included in that set of handouts is an end of year checklist and a beginning of year checklist that was developed with myself and Dr. Eliza Godfrey. And so just wanting to recognize, although we're talking about a number of these steps today, these checklists are meant to be a support for families in really thinking about some of the things that could be discussed with school teams in order to end the school year strongly and also transition into the new year. All right, so now we are going to start by thinking about exposures for springtime at school. As we think about a school year, it's important to recognize that often the springtime is a time when our kiddos with selective mutism are at their most comfortable in the school environment. They have now had a number of months to get to know their school staff, the peers in their classroom, and hopefully throughout that time period have had opportunities for exposure practice to build greater and greater communication with select staff in the school or classroom environment. And so when we're thinking about spring exposures, I think it's also important to think about how we might be able to start maximizing towards a higher level goal from where your kiddo has been in maybe an earlier time frame. Often for many kiddos with SM, we will see, whereas the start of the year took some time to build comfort with communicating with school staff, as the school year progresses, there may be more direct communication, answering of questions when asked, or maybe even asking and sharing some information in the school classroom environment. And so as we reach the springtime, it will be helpful to also think about, based on your child's growth and progress, if we could maybe be working towards some of these higher level types of exposure practices. Now, exposure practices where we're working on practicing using our brave words through various settings and situations in the school environment is certainly an important part of treatment for selective mutism. And so different types of higher level exposure practices that you could consider if your child has reached some of those lower steps, such as being able to answer questions from a staff member or participate more directly in the classroom. Maybe things like practice around asking more questions. Practice in initiation, so actually starting some of the conversations or sharing more information without being prompted to do so. Practice with self-advocacy, asking for help with things, asking to use the restroom, or asking to go to the office for things. These can be things that we are setting as goals with our kiddos, but at the same time, they may also be things that we could target in specific practices with school staff. More support around presentations is another space where the spring can be a great time to build out and script out presentation opportunities for our kiddos with selective mutism. And with peers, we might be building out more conversational skills where if they've built some comfort to share and answer questions from peers, we might be moving more to back and forth communication or how to maintain a conversation beyond just answering a question or asking a question. And so as you think about your kiddos, certainly think about if some of these might be appropriate based on your kiddos' current level of growth, and talk with the school team about how we might be able to start putting some of these extra exposure practices into play within the school year or in the school day. I wanted to think more specifically about, we know exposures are often more engaging when there's something that's fun and interesting to be doing. And so I have some ideas around some fun spring exposures that you might consider. And for this, we're going to think about 3 different types of settings or situations within the school environment. So first, we're going to talk a little bit more about exposures during recess time, exposures in the classroom, and exposures in the school environment more broadly. So again, these are just a few ideas. Maybe these might spark some additional ideas for your child's school or events that happen in the school building. So please know these are just a few ideas to hopefully spark some inspiration for you. When we're thinking about recess exposures, often in the springtime, our goal is to be working on, as we talked about, some of those higher level goals, communication with other peers or new peers. And so there are lots of different ways that we might be able to go about that process. One of those that we can think of is scripting out or having a set goal around inviting friends to play. So whereas we may have started the school year with just joining in to play with peers, working on answering or sharing responses when they ask questions, again, if we're reaching some of those higher goals in the spring, it may be appropriate or valuable to work on that next step of asking a friend to play. And so again, when we're working on that asking a friend, scripting out responses or providing a specific response for the child to share can be a helpful way for them to really know exactly what to expect as they're asking a friend to play. Now, when we have something like a sentence script, do you want to do chalk with me or do you want to play chalk with me? We can also think about how to practice that in advance with staff in the school. It could be something that's practiced at home or even practiced with a peer that comes to the house for a play date. So there's been lots of practice with it before we translate it into the recess time. But then ultimately, this might be something that we set some goals around a child asking on certain days or certain times throughout the week so that they can get some more repeated practice with inviting a friend or asking a friend to play with them. Our second one here is a recess scavenger hunt, a fun way for peers to join together and participate in an activity, but something that maybe has some more specific speaking expectations built into it. So here in this example, we have a partner activity where partners are looking together to find different items in the school playground. Here we have a slide, some swings, a flag, flowers, a trash can, and the sun. And for all of these, we're asking the children to look together and then identify the color of the item that they are finding. So maybe the trash cans in their school are green, or the flowers in the field are blue. And so first they're supposed to verbally identify the color that they found for each of the items, and then request a colored pencil in that color so that they can color it in on their scavenger hunt sheet. And once they've completed that, they can check it off and say they found that thing. This is something that could be done more broadly or set up by a school psychologist or a school counselor or a special education teacher as an activity that's built into recess, or it could be something that's done with a whole class as well. And for our older kiddos, often group activities become something that's more common. Things like Foursquare or Gaga Ball or basketball. And so within that, we might set some more specific talking expectations for those types of tasks. So for example, in Foursquare, calling the ball as in or out may be one of the talking rules while we play Foursquare. And we might be working on some of those higher level skills like saying good game at the end and practicing saying that to our peers so that we can build some comfort in sharing in that way. So again, during the springtime when we're outside and really enjoying all of those things that nicer weather brings, lots of different ways in which we can do some exposures during recess. Also opportunities to do that within the classroom environment. So here I have some ideas based on just some common activities that happen in the spring, as well as some common crafts that would happen in an elementary school in the spring. So the first one we're going to talk about today is something like a craft activity that shares information about a child. And so often something like making a spring flower with your handprint is a common thing that we might see as a craft activity. So on here, we have some specific expectations, writing the child's name on the palm, and then on each of the fingers of the flower, putting some things that they like. So 5 things that they like. That can be something identified, but then this becomes a very specific and targeted practice for sharing in the class environment. Now, again, we could break that down into what it means to share in the class environment based on your child's current comfort level. And so for some, it may be sharing with a peer to start, or sharing in a small group, or sharing in the whole classroom environment. But again, the benefit of something like this is it's a specific task that has some talking rules. It can be something that's repeated and practiced over time, and it's really clearly scripted out about what some of the things are that you would share. During the springtime, we also have spring break. I know that for many of us here, spring break's coming up very soon. And so for spring break, it is also a time where we often think about in classrooms what happens when we come back from spring break. Often there are questions. Where did you go? What did you do? What was your favorite thing that you did? Was the weather nice where you went? And so for all of those different things, we might be able to build out a talking script that might help your child better participate in some of those conversations, or maybe even present that as part of an activity in the classroom. So here we have a break talking script. This is one that's modified for someone who's maybe younger, where there are written options, but also the option to draw pictures. And so in the spring talking script, we see that it has a space for a name, an overall rating of your spring break. So on 5 stars, how would you rate your spring break? And then for it, it says, I went to blank. I went with blank. My favorite activity was blank, and the weather was blank. And so 4 different things that could be shared about, drawn and shown, and then practiced in preparation to share in either with a peer or in a small group activity or in a whole group presentation if that's something that your child has built up comfort to do. We know also that communication with peers is something that we might be targeting. And so craft activities are a wonderful way for kiddos to participate and share with their peers. And so this is just an example of a making flower activity where it would allow a child to be practicing with their friend, asking a friend to be a partner, choosing what colors they want their flowers to be or what types of flowers. So they may have options that they can choose from and talk about. And then asking their partner for the supplies to make the craft. Can you hand me the glue? Can you hand me the paper? Can you hand me the scissors? I need the blue marker. Where we can actually practice, depending on where your child's comfort level is, doing things like working towards full sentence scripting of those types of activities as well. More broadly, in the school environment, we might be also working to expand communication beyond just the classroom environment and into other places in the school as well. And so these are just some ideas about how you might be able to start sharing some of the things beyond just the classroom. So the first one here is a weather-related survey. So I'm located here in the Midwest, and in the last 2 weeks, we have had 8 inches of snow, a torrential downpour, and a 70-degree day. And so our weather has been all over the place. And so thinking about something like asking a survey of what do people like more? Do they like the rain, the sun, or the snow most? This can be something where we script out that specific question to ask, and then maybe with a child's supporter, if that's a key worker that they're working with in the school environment, or a special education teacher, or a school psychologist that might help support them, might facilitate going to different locations in the school building, the front office, the music room, the art room, and asking these questions to other adult staff or peers in order to kind of reach our goal. So here it is, ask 20 people, do you like rain, sun, or snow most? And then we can take the numbers to track which is the winner between rain, sun, and snow. Another thing that happens in some schools in the springtime is a field day or an opportunity to go outdoors and explore and have kind of a day for fun games and activities outside. And so within that, we might also have some activities where we're working for your kiddo to earn some bravery points. Here is a bravery bingo for field day. And so the goal is to get 3 in a row where your kiddo might be choosing different activities that they could practice and work on in field day. And here it has all sorts of different things like counting off your number if you're counting off for a sport game or team, saying the color of in a ball toss game. So maybe you're tossing different balls across a way and you're naming the color of the ball that you're tossing. It might be saying something like thank you, so a social pleasantry as they received a snack from a staff member. Or asking a friend to be a partner. And so each of these, again, can be individualized based on your child's current speaking level and comfort, but can all be related to the field game activities. So it feels very relevant, something that is related to what your child is doing and thinking. And lastly, we know that the end of the school year also means an opportunity to reflect on what you've done throughout the year. And so this is an idea of a scavenger hunt, but one where we're looking for things related to our school memories. And so, for example, it might be an opportunity to go find an art project from art class that you did, or identify one with your art teacher. And maybe to identify with your music teacher a music song that you really enjoyed. Maybe it's going to the library and identifying a favorite book that you read during the school year. Or going to your classroom teacher to talk about a special brave classroom achievement that was made. Maybe going to a friend to identify an activity that made you laugh or something that made you laugh at school. And going to your science room to find something new that you learned in science. And so each of these could be a specific goal or practice opportunity to go out and engage with more staff members, but also it allows you to reflect on the school year and all the different things that have been happening. Okay, so again, opportunities for that exposure practice to practice using our words at a level that's appropriate based on your kiddo's current level of growth is a really important part. And springtime, again, a wonderful time to really be looking at how we can build out more opportunities that are fun and creative and keep things interesting. But the springtime is also a wonderful time to acknowledge the growth and success your kiddo has had over the last school year. The question of why do we need to take time to acknowledge that growth? I always like to think about, when we are doing something day in and day out, we're putting in the hard work at building our bravery, building our comfort to share and communicate. When we are doing that each day, it's really difficult to recognize or to understand when growth has happened or if growth has happened. I think we all might have those scenarios where when we were doing something over time, over a long period of time, it may be harder to notice. Often for adults, one we think about is something like when you're trying to get healthier or lose weight. That day in and day out, it's hard to notice some of those big changes that are occurring because we see ourselves every day. But then you might see someone who hasn't seen you in a few months and they go, oh, so different, you look great. And so I think in a similar way with kiddos with selective mutism, if we are working on building goals, we may not always recognize all the brave, awesome, amazing things that we have done step by step along the way to make the gains that we have. And so here I have just a lot of quotes about recognizing that any growth really happens through small efforts, small steps, repeated daily until we reach a level of success that we're trying to work towards. And so I think that's such an important thing to recognize. I think the question is then, how do we do that? How do we acknowledge the success our kiddo has had without it feeling too big or over the top? And so a few different ideas that I wanted to recognize that help us maybe track and measure and monitor growth and change over time. These are things that you can encourage a school staff team or a team member from the school staff to be doing with your kiddo, or there's certainly things you can do at home as well. So here we have two that are really about kind of tracking the growth and progress over time. One of these is a talking map, and it's really looking more at physical locations in the school building. So again, this is something where you could actually have your kiddo draw those different places in the school. So make your own map of the school, which includes things like maybe the front office, the principal's office, the playground, the gym, the library, your classroom, music room, whatever places your child goes more regularly. Here we just have squares, so a little less fun than when a kiddo gets to draw it themselves. And then at some point earlier in the year, it can be helpful to do something like track where is your kiddo's current comfort level with those different areas. So in this scenario, I often use a dark green to say a place where I'm comfortable and currently sharing my words. A light green is a place where maybe I've started to share my words, but I'm still building my comfort. A yellow is a place where I haven't yet used my words, but I'm working towards it, or I'm getting more comfortable. And a red is a place where I'm not yet comfortable. And so, again, if we're able to have that visual representation of what it looked like maybe at the beginning of the school year, we can also check in on that over time. So in the winter time, we might do another check-in to say, what colors would we give these spaces now? And over time to the spring, we can do it again and then do a reference and say, wow, how cool. When we started the school year, we had the library and the playground and the principal's office and the gym were all reds. And look at, we've gotten some of our reds to turn yellow, and maybe we even got our yellow homeroom to turn to green. And that is all from the bravery that you've put in. And so this is a visual representation to see that change over time. This other form of a talking map is one for communication with peers or staff in the classroom environment. So this might be something we could use if our goal is really to work on transferring communication into the classroom setting. And so for this, we can have a picture of the classroom along with either a drawn picture or actual pictures of the kiddos' faces from the classroom. So all of the classmates and maybe even staff that are involved. And as your kiddo builds comfort to share with a new peer in that setting or a new staff member in that setting, they're able to be moved into the classroom environment to show that they are now a part of your speaking circle. And so again, what we can see is if we're able to look at this over time, one, we can identify the change that happens. By the spring, there likely will be many more peers and staff members in that classroom than when we started the school year. And in addition to it, we can sometimes see that this becomes a motivating factor for our kiddos. Maybe they've gotten to 10 of their 12 classmates and they're like, oh, I'm so close to the last. I just got to get these last two. And it can add some extra motivation for building in more speaking peers or partners. Another way to kind of check in and track success over the year is to think about comfort ratings. So how has your child's comfort grown as the school year has come along? And so lots of different ways we can look at that. Here on the bottom, we have this visual one that is often more helpful for some of our younger kids, something like a green smiley face or a thumbs up, meaning it felt comfortable. A yellow or neutral face or a thumb sideways, it felt so-so. And a red brownie face downward thumb, suggesting that it was not yet comfortable to do. And so again, this is something we can do anytime we do a brave practice or a brave speaking practice where we can check in. Did that feel green thumbs up, yellow thumb sideways, red thumbs down? And then we can also track that over time. So we can see that things that maybe started as red thumbs down, turn to yellows, turn to greens over time. And you can say, how cool, that thing used to feel like a red and now it's a green. For older kids, we might not use the smiley faces and the visuals, but we might use something like a number scale system. Some people will use the term a subjective units of distress or a SUD scale to measure this. I often like to frame it more as a bravery scale. So where was your bravery level, or how comfortable did this feel for you? And again, you can do that often in, depending on your kiddo, a 0 to 5 or a 0 to 7. This one's rated as a 0 to 10. How comfortable did it feel when we practiced that skill together? And same thing there. You can track over time and actually even graph it on a graph to say, hey, that's so neat. Our numbers were at 2s and 3s when we started, but as we've practiced this, we've seen those numbers move up to 7s, 8s, 9s. I often say there aren't many things that make it to the top of the scale because I don't know of many things that we're like fully comfortable to do. But if we're in that comfort zone, that's exactly where we want to be. And so to be able to track that and see that change can be very motivating for kiddos. I have the planets here because for some kids, having something maybe a little more related to something they enjoy is helpful. And so this was an example of one that we used to measure comfort, where it was kind of how close or far away to the sun do you feel? And so the goal was to get closer to the sun in this way instead of further away from the sun. And we were able to track which planet were they at this point in time. I've also had kiddos where they love dragons, and so it's been what level of fire breathing out of the dragon's mouth are you at this point in time? Another option is maybe you have set a more specific goal for something that you're practicing in the school environment. So for example, here is an asking questions in class goal, where the goal is to reach 5 questions in a day. And so in this case, it's something that we can track and monitor and show growth over time. And so this can sometimes be a really helpful thing to bring back and show to a child of saying, hey, 10 days ago, we were at a 0. And over these last 10 days, you've moved from 0 all the way up to the 5. That is so cool. You are so brave. And so, again, these visual ways help kiddos see the growth and change that they're making over time. All right. So we've talked about exposures. We've talked about celebrating those successes in the springtime. I want to now transition into thinking about how can we help to support the transition or planning for transition into a new school year. Often this starts by having some sort of end of school year meeting with a school team. Who to include in that school team does somewhat depend on your school and who the support staff are. And so in general, I would say any key staff members, ones that are working really closely with your child, people like the general classroom teacher, if they're in special education or if they have an IEP. Certainly, we might be doing this more formally as an IEP meeting and having the special ed teacher there, any school psychologist, school counselor, school social worker your child may be working with, any key worker that's helping to support some of that bravery practice at school would be included in this end of year meeting. It also might be of value to have an administrator there, someone who can more definitively say yes or no to some of the requests that you might be asking for. And then certainly in some scenarios, we might also have your kiddo involved. So depending on the age of your child, they may very much want to, or they may be of value to be a part of the team as we're talking about some of the goal practice. At the end of the school year meeting, again, sometimes this is done informally by just a check-in meeting with some of these key people to talk about how things have gone and what to plan for next year. But we also know there are some individuals that are supported through something like a 504 plan or an IEP, where this might be a more formal meeting that we're having to talk about things with the whole team. Now, again, for those annual meetings for an IEP or a 504 plan, we know that those happen once annually, and so it somewhat depends on when your child qualified for services. So, for example, maybe your child qualified in the fall, and that meeting happens every year in the fall. I do want to just acknowledge that even if that is the case, you have a right at any time throughout the school year to convene that team for an IEP or 504 meeting. And so you are welcome to request a meeting in the spring. And sometimes it's even talked about as a review or revise meeting where we're exploring if we need to make any adjustments in the accommodation supports or the goal planning for the next year. During that meeting, there are a number of different things that could be talked about. And so I wanted to highlight a few ones that I think are really important to have as discussions with school teams. One of those is to take some time to really reflect with the team about what was successful in the year. What growth did we see, and what were kind of the key factors that made things successful in the year? And in particular, if there were specific tools or supports that we would want to make sure are going to be available to our kiddo for the year to come. In addition to that, we likely are going to want to be planning for any adjustments that will be happening for the new school year. And so that might be kind of, is there anything about the way we've been supporting our kiddo with SM that we would want to adjust for the new year? Are we able to identify the teacher early so that we can maybe know here in the spring instead of waiting until the fall to be able to start building some of that comfort and communication earlier on? Are we able to identify any changes in support staff? Now, some things happen unpredictably, like you might have a support staff member that becomes pregnant and is out on maternity leave during that time, or someone who leaves unexpectedly. But if there are specific changes that we know are predictable, so for example, if your kiddo's in special education and we know the way that it's approached in the school is that each year they receive a new special education teacher, that's something predictable that we could know about in advance and maybe start planning for early. Are there opportunities to do any fade-ins or connecting points with any of those new team members still in the spring instead of waiting until the fall? Are there opportunities to go visit the classroom or tour some of those spaces in the school where your child maybe hasn't had as much exposure so that they're ready for it when they move into the new school year? And the spring is also a good time to just start thinking about if there are any additional resources that would be valuable to share with the school team or any ongoing training that may be necessary for the team. Now, when we're thinking about some of those things, if you're working with a specific mental health provider, they might be able to help provide some of that training or additional resources. In addition to that, the Selective Mutism Association does have the Educator's Web course, which includes a number of training materials as well. Okay. As we think about the school year ending, we're going to celebrate all of the amazing work your kiddos have done over the last year. And now is the time to be thinking about how we can help use these months where kiddos aren't in the regular kind of day in and day out of school to try to help ease that transition as much as possible. And so for summer activities, I broke this into kind of 4 different parts that we might want to be thinking about. One of them would be school visits or opportunities to engage with the school and school building during the summer months. We'll also think about any staff connections that might be possible over the summer, peer connections over the summer, and then starting to plan for those few weeks before the school year starts. How can we really help to make that transition as smooth as possible? So specific to school visits during the summer, what we often do see is the months away from the general exposure to the school environment can sometimes lead to some discomfort when we move back into the fall and are going back into all of these spaces that we've been away for a longer period of time. And so if there are opportunities for you to connect with the school in different ways during that time, it can be really helpful. So I had a few just ideas that I wanted to talk about specifically around the school building. So the first one is at the playground. Certainly, it's always wonderful to talk with the school team to see if it's feasible to get into the school, into the building, walk the hallways, engage in the places where your kiddo will be more regularly. But we know that's not always feasible. And so the playground, though, is often available at any time where it would potentially be possible to go to the playground, play out on the playground, work on establishing communication out on the playground, or maybe even bring a friend or a peer to practice communicating with them when there aren't all of the other kids and staff and people around. An opportunity to really get some fun playtime where we can also be practicing using our words. Again, as we mentioned, some school teams will be able to offer the opportunity to get into the school building. That is something that is not guaranteed. We know that there aren't any legal requirements for the school, even with an IEP, not a legal requirement that you have access to those things during the school year. And so it's sometimes not feasible. In fact, I think of a kiddo that I worked with where last summer they were having some major renovations in the school. And so no one was allowed in the school building, not even school staff, as they were ripping up floors and redoing a number of things to get ready for the new year. So it's not always feasible, but sometimes there are opportunities to connect in the school building. Some school staff will say during these times, the principal is in the building, and so it would be okay for you to come in and walk the halls together for a short period of time. Or it may be something of the speech and language pathologists or school psychologists will be here at these times during the year or during the summer, and we might be able to schedule just a short meeting with them. Again, not guarantees, but things you can always ask and see if they're feasible. And the worst that you can find out is that no, they're not. This picture here I have on the bottom is to really think about summer school, because I know that's one question I often get from families about, well, to try to help with that, is summer school a good option? And I would say it does certainly depend on your kiddo and what summer school looks like. For some children, if it's in a different school building with completely different school staff, if they have an IEP and we know that those IEP goals and supports are not going to be put in place, if we don't have the opportunity to have kind of the support staff that are going to be able to help to facilitate some better communication in the school building, just being in the school and potentially in a space where people are asking questions and reinforcing non-communication, summer school may not always be the best option. But if we know that it's a staff member that your kiddo is going to have as a teacher next year, and that staff member is aware of some of the tools and open to using them, it's possible that that extra time to engage and participate with the staff could be beneficial. So again, I think when we think about something like summer school, it's really important to know what it looks like and what you could expect within it. Connecting with staff over the summer is another thing that we often are considering. And again, this is another one that's going to be very dependent on each staff member. Legally, there is no legal requirement for a teacher to be involved during the summer. In fact, most contracts are not for a full 12 months, and so they are not contracted by the school at that time. I will recognize across all of the different schools that I have worked with that that this is really going to be dependent on each teacher or staff member on how open they are to engaging during the summer months. I have had school staff that have met at a local swimming pool to connect in a more neutral type of space, or gone to a coffee shop to meet a student. Um, I have had staff that have been willing to go into the school building a few times and connect with students there. And I have had other staff that have said, this is my boundary, and no, this is not an option for us. And so, again, I think all are reasonable, and there's no legal expectation for a staff member to be involved during the summer. But it's always something that we can ask about and see. There are also potentially some ways to connect that wouldn't require kind of an in-person connection. Some of those might be through something like a virtual connection. Maybe a staff member isn't willing to come to the building, but they pop on for a 10-minute Zoom where maybe you can do a fun activity, or show the house to them, or something like that, where your kiddo would be in the comfort of their own home meeting their teacher for the first time. In addition to that, for some staff members where we know connecting over the summer is not going to be an option, I've requested some things like pre-recorded videos, where a teacher or a school psychologist has pre-recorded some videos to share with the kiddo, so that the kiddo can watch those videos over the summer and maybe even work on responding back to them, making their own recording and sharing it back to the staff member that had sent it. In fact, there are also even opportunities to do something like recording a video of response and then splicing those two together. So you see the teacher ask a question and your child respond to that question. And even just getting an opportunity to watch that back throughout the summer can be a positive option for just starting to build some of that connection with school staff. Peers are another place where we certainly might have the opportunity to connect over the summer. Again, who should we target for peer connection? I would always say any peers that your child has expressed comfort in, or comfort with, or if they've spoken to in the previous year, those would be great peers to be targeting initially in communication, or for play dates. You also might look at, if you're able to know who some of the peers will be for the next school year, this is a space where we might want to target some of those peers so your child can become more familiar with them. But to do that through something like a play date, where you might start in your own home, a place where your child is more comfortable, where you might be able to help facilitate that fade in towards greater communication. I often say, where do we target that? Certainly starting with playdates in your home. Before, once you have built some comfort and communication there, we might move to a neutral space like a park, or a peer's home. And then you could also consider, over the summer, potentially trying to move that into a school environment. So could they come with you as you walk the halls one day? Or could they come with you to the playground and play at the school playground? This is something that I think is valuable to do regularly throughout the summer. So not just a one-time connecting point, but if it's something that can be arranged more regularly, it gives your child more exposure to that student before the new school year starts. Okay, and our last section before we go to questions is fading into the new school year. When we think about the transition into the new school year, I recognize that the way that it's often set up in schools is a lot all at once. And so if I think about going to my own child's beginning of year school events, there are lots of people that are unfamiliar to us. There are new staff members. The way that they do it at their school, there's loud noises and things happening all around. And there's really only the connection for about at most a 5-minute touch point with your teacher, as they're also saying hello and meeting many other children and families in your child's class. And so when we think about fading into the new year, one of the things we really recommend is trying to slow down that process and have opportunities to do it that aren't just in those big welcome to the new school year events. So a few things to consider. One might be, as you think about kind of the weeks leading up to school or the month leading up to school, that's a great time to start reaching out again to the key support at the school, be that administration, a school psychologist or counselor, or any special ed services or supports, in order to try to connect and get some answers on a few of these different things. One of them may be, what kind of training is your school interested in receiving? I have offered training to different school teams, and I have done initial trainings for staff that are new or unfamiliar to supporting a child with selective mutism. But I also have teams that say, could you come and just do a half-hour refresher so that we feel really up to speed with the skills before the school year starts? Maybe we can take a moment and talk about the specific goals we should be focusing on as the school year starts. And so there may be an opportunity for training options. And even if there aren't opportunities for more targeted training, you may be able to at least share some materials, things like the Selective Mutism Association's Educators Toolkit, so that they receive just some information about selective mutism before the school year starts. I also often recommend having just a one-pager that shares a picture of your child, some information about what they look like when they're comfortable at home, as compared to the impact that selective mutism can have for them. That shares some of their interests, some skills to remind them of, and then some things to try to avoid, like asking unnecessary questions that they're not yet ready to answer. Another area that you might want to be thinking about is discussing kind of who are the finalized staff. So if there were things like teacher or special education supports or key worker that were not finalized in the spring, it's valuable to touch base again in the month leading up to school to see, okay, can we have some more answers of who these individuals will be? It's also a good time to check in if you, again, don't know from the spring who the peers are in the classroom. It's a good time to check in again and say, hey, do we know if there are any specific peers that are comfortable peers for my child? And if not, are there some that we think might be good people to target at the beginning of the school year? In addition to that, it's valuable to talk about what might intervention look like as the school year starts so that we can have a plan in advance instead of waiting. And often if you wait until school starts, it often means you're going to wait for about a month until things really get started. And so again, I think if we can have those conversations in advance, have a plan in place in advance, it helps to move those things forward more quickly. And so discussing intervention time as well as general classroom expectations. And then the plan for how we are going to do that fade in. So what would it look like to come in early before the school year starts? What can we do to tour the school if we haven't been able to do that over the summer? And how can we prioritize some time with key staff? In the preparation for, say your school team has agreed, we'll give you 2 times to come in before the school year starts. there are some things that would be helpful to do to prepare for that fade-in opportunity. Um, One is what you're going to communicate to the school. So if it's, say, your classroom teacher or a school psychologist or a key worker that you're fading in with, you'll want to make sure they know the plan for what that fade in is going to look like. And you'll likely want to review with them some of those skills like the CDI and VDI skills or what a fade in looks like. Send some videos. I know videos exist through a number of different spaces like Selective Mutism University, or your provider might have a specific set of links that they send to you. Share those out with the school so that your key worker can review them. You might also want to think about communication with your child. What are you going to say about the fade-in that's going to happen? Likely talking about that idea of building bravery and all the bravery that they've shown and our opportunity to meet a new staff member to build our comfort and bravery with that new staff member. We might want to give a little bit more about what to expect. We're going to go to the school. We'll have some toys that we'll bring. We'll get to play in the classroom. You'll get to help maybe do the bulletin board for your teacher, or do certain things for your teacher to help the classroom be really ready to go for you and your classmates. And you might also introduce, if you're using something like bravery points, where they get to earn some bravery points for sharing and communicating well in their fade-in. It's great to introduce that in advance. And then personally, you might also want to think about your preparation. What are you going to bring? Any toys or specific activities that you're going to bring that day? What's your plan A of how you hope the fade-in goes versus your plan B or C if things aren't going as planned? How can you make those adjustments or be prepared to make those adjustments? And lastly, making sure that you're also continuing to care for yourself and how you're going to manage any of your own distress tolerance or discomforts that come as you're doing those practices. And lastly, the step is to actually go and do that fade-in, which may happen once or may be something that occurs over a repeated amount of time. I have this broken down for older or younger children. Essentially, for our younger kiddos, it's just saying that we're going to start with time just you and your child in the room. Your teacher is gradually going to enter into the room. They're going to increase engagement as your child is comfortable responding and engaging with you. And then over time, they'll join into the activity and start to ask questions. For our older kiddos, again, we're just maybe even more upfront about that process, discussing the purpose and the goal, allowing them to pick what activity or thing they might get to do with their staff member before we actually go and do that fade-in. All right, it's a lot to go through spring all the way to the fall. So I really appreciate your time and thinking through some of these things with me. I know we have a few minutes left for questions, so we can move on with that then.
Yeah, Brittany, thank you so much for sharing all of this information and all of these creative ideas to practice brave talking. Um, a few questions came through that I'm going to funnel to you, and I'm kind of actually going to tie two different questions together.
Okay.
Um, and so I guess what advice would you give on tailoring these strategies for a child who is not yet speaking at school? So kind of that initial establishment of speech. And relatedly, is there a best way to encourage speech at school? And you do you just kind of follow the child's lead? And what do you do if they don't want to speak?
Good question. Lots of good things to share within that. And again, I would encourage, there are some great webinars that exist about kind of what to do if your child is currently nonverbal in the school environment. And so I think we can think about that too for additional resources. But what I would say is certainly our initial goal, if our kiddos are not currently speaking in the school environment, our first goal is trying to establish communication with someone. And so we talked about these fade-ins as something that can happen in the fall, but fade-ins are supports that could be offered at any time during the school year. And so a fade-in to try to establish communication with a key person, a staff member or someone that the child is more comfortable and sees more regularly, would certainly be one of my first recommendations. Some of these other things might also be we might need to be starting by backing up to nonverbal engagement and participation. So, for example, kiddos who maybe are really struggling to even participate in the not in tasks nonverbally, we might be setting some goals of nonverbal participation, like joining into the activity, finishing or completing the activity. We've even had things like practicing raising hand, knowing that you're not going to be called on at this time. And so, again, I think it's really about exploring with your school team where your child's current functioning is and exploring what one step higher might be at this time. The last thing I'll just mention with that is often if our kiddos are not yet saying that they are wanting to use their words in school, I think that's a common thing that we see of when we have been avoiding this thing that feels uncomfortable for us, we can get into that space of, nope, that is over there, anxiety wall is up, and I do not want to do this. And so again, I think that's where breaking down into steps where we can help your kiddo feel successful, earning reinforcements or like those bravery points for being able to share and participate in whatever goal, and spinning any sort of step forward as a success, I think are all important things to really start to build some of that motivation for kids as well.
Excellent. And I know we're getting pretty late, so maybe I'll just give you one more question before we say goodnight.
Yeah.
This one is how should I interpret a school that doesn't want me as the parent to go to school with the child? So I think maybe more broadly, how do you kind of navigate some of those challenges that can come up with schools regarding communication with parents, and what do you do when the school is sort of pushing back against parental involvement?
Great question. And I think something that we see vary so much from school to school. I think one of the things that I certainly do recommend is thinking about just the education that we can provide to school teams, that sometimes there may be a misunderstanding or a perspective that a parent coming into the school environment is going to be more distressing or more challenging and not lead to success. So I think first off, some more education to school teams about what that fade-in process is about, and maybe collaboration with the team to determine, is there a time in the school day that may be more appropriate? So if they're feeling like maybe the beginning of the day is harder because the letting go or saying goodbye to your kiddo after your fade in the morning is tough, maybe we can transition that to the end of the school day. And would there be an opportunity to do something then? Um, in addition to that, it may be something that if you are working with a provider, having them to help to provide suggestions of what they're seeing that could be helpful and useful. Um, and then the last thing I would say is if your child has gotten to the point where they are using words and are successfully communicating in the school environment, there may be opportunities to then use school staff. So I would say, again, if I think working to be collaborative and work with the school is really important. But some of that is, as your child has success, we may pull back on how much we're in the school and do more of just that checking in on how progress is going, encouraging adjustments as successes are happening. All right.
Excellent. Well, thank you all so much for joining us this evening and for all of the great questions. I was very busy typing answers in the Q&A as Brittany was talking. And Brittany, thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us.
Thank you as well, everyone, for your time today. And I hope some of these materials and resources are helpful for you.